So we'll start by setting our motivation. So we try to generate a broad, altruistic intention for listening and contemplating His Holiness's teachings on the wisdom wing of the Buddhist path. So again, we contemplate the necessity of growing in wisdom, the benefits for oneself, moving from a state of confusion to a state of clarity. And then recognizing being able to share those benefits with others. How that unlocks our potential. So we develop a mind of confidence in the teachings themselves, and a mind of expansive altruism, wanting to use what we learn to be of benefit. Right. So with that motivation, we'll turn back to the material. And the good news is that the difficult part, the difficult section of the book for the most part is behind us. We spent the last 3 weeks looking at the wisdom teachings themselves. And now we're up to chapter 8. And in chapter 8 and next few sections, His Holiness is going to talk about the necessary cooperative conditions that we need to be able to be successful in developing that insight into the nature of reality that we have looked at. So essentially what he's going to begin to explain is the topic of calm abiding and the special insight that arises from calm abiding. So it's clear with respect to meditating on the analytical topics of the Lam Rim that we can develop some insight, we can develop some level of intellectual understanding, even after perhaps several months, a couple of years of studying, meditating. We can definitely have even profound reorientation of our perspective, our priorities, our views, independence upon study of the Lam Rim and meditating on the Lam Rim with a relatively ordinary mind. However, so you could call that ordinary insight. However, there is special insight, which is the meditative realization of a topic that arises in the mind of a practitioner who's developed fully qualified calm abiding, or shamatha, shine in English, calm abiding, but you'll see different words depending on the Sanskrit or the Tibetan. But sometimes mental quiescence is another English translation. Calm abiding is the most common. Geshe Zopa will be teaching on calm abiding for the next few, not tomorrow, but after that, the next few Sundays after that, giving a sort of an overview of this topic as well, the topic of cultivating calm abiding. So, as we'll see, calm abiding is a way, there is a way of thinking about it that's presented in the Tibetan tradition that is, you could say arbitrary, because they talk about these 9 stages of developing. Because previously I had said fully qualified calm abiding. So that refers to the attainment of the 9th level of calm abiding, um, joined with mental and physical bliss and pliancy. So that mental and physical bliss and pliancy, it's still considered the 9th level, but there is sort of at the beginning of the 9th level, the first meditation on the 9th level. I don't know exactly how it works, but the mental and physical bliss and pliancy kind of gets added to the 9th level after working with the 9th level. So it becomes fully qualified calm abiding when the mental and physical bliss and pliancy arise. I guess it takes some period of time of being on the 9th level before the physical and mental bliss and pliancy are fully developed. And when they are fully developed, then fully qualified calm abiding arises. And essentially, a practitioner who's developed fully qualified calm abiding is able to meditate in an incredibly deep and stable way where distractions don't arise in the mind. Only the intended object of meditation arises in the mind, and it remains or abides, as is implied by the name of the skill. It abides in the mind without any reduction in its vibrancy or its clarity. They say it's like water being, the mind and the meditative object is like water being poured into water at this stage. So that's the general direction where these next teachings are going, because His Holiness points out in chapter 8 that with this topic, and really with any of the Lamrim topics, and with meditation in general, we can say that there are 2 modes of meditation. There's analytical aspect of meditation, and then there's a stabilizing aspect of meditation. Sometimes you can divide these into separate sessions. Like if you were to do a breathing meditation, then the object doesn't really require analysis. So that's a purely stabilizing meditation. If, however, you were to do an analytical meditation, like emptiness meditation or any of the Lamrim meditations, even an analytical meditation is going to have an aspect of stabilizing, because you're going to arrive at an insight about the topic due to the force of having analyzed that topic. You will come to a conclusion, you will arrive at an insight. And once you've done that, the analytical part of that meditation has served its purpose. and you no longer need to investigate, provided that the insight is still dawning in the mind, is still something that you are holding in the mind. It's often the experience for us that, not having developed calm abiding, some sort of insight, some sort of um, conclusory thought does arise. We have some feeling of the meditation, the point of it, the essence of it, but then distraction, perhaps a strong distraction, arises, and we may it may be a minute or several minutes before we recollect the intended purpose of that session, because we're indulging in the distraction. So if we've gone that far, even though we had caused the insight at whatever level we're able to generate the insight, we've gone so far astray, we'll need to go back into some analytical mode to give rise to that same insight again. And then we try to just hold that insight in the mind, with introspective awareness, um, kind of holding not tight but closely to the insight that we've generated, which allows that insight to kind of steep into the mind, to penetrate kind of the deeper levels of the mind. Um, but we're going back and forth to some degree between analysis and stability. Uh, so, what we've done up to this point in the book, what His Holiness has explained, is how you go about engaging in the analysis. How do you investigate or interrogate appearances to give rise to some level of insight that the object that appears to exist inherently, independently from its own side, to have some intrinsic essence or characteristic to demonstrate to the mind that it does not, that appearance is false. Uh, and then once you have that insight, you should just you rest your mind in that insight. And to do that well, you need to not have the mind stray. Of course, even to do the analysis well, you don't want your mind to stray from what you're analyzing. But it's true that when we are analyzing, we're intentionally adding some level of discursiveness to the mind, because we are thinking, we're following this thought and then that thought, this argument, this analogy, that analogy. So there is an intentional level of discursiveness. Um, the unintentional discursiveness is thinking about, you know, something that someone said to us earlier that day that upset us, or thinking about what we'd rather be doing. Um, that's also discursiveness of mind, but it's not uh, intended or wanted. And that's the problematic aspect of uh, what the mind naturally wants to do. And His Holiness points out that as long as our sessions of meditation are affected strongly by those unintentional distractions, then the insights that we gain from meditation will always be somewhat limited. As I said, you can have dramatic, life changing insights without calm abiding, but to actually uh, achieve enlightenment, for example, it isn't sufficient to have those kinds of insights. You actually do have to cultivate fully qualified calm abiding and give rise to special insight. It's only special insight into the nature of reality that can actually give rise to enlightenment. So the doorway to enlightenment specifically does in fact depend on cultivating calm abiding. There's no way around it. There's no choice but to at some point, develop it, and if we want to achieve enlightenment. Let me pause. Any questions? Nope. All right. So he says, despite the fact that distraction is our current state, the capacities for knowledge which we all possess can be drawn together and focused on an object we want to understand, as we uh, as we do when we listen to important instructions. Through such focus, all practices, whether love, compassion, the altruistic intention to become enlightened, or insight into your own nature, and the actual condition of all other phenomena, are dramatically enhanced. So your progress is much faster and more profound. He says Buddhism offers many techniques for developing a form of concentration, which we're introducing, which he's, again calling calm abiding, using that translation of shamatha, shine. This powerful state of concentration, he says, earns its name because in it all distractions have been calmed, um, and your mind is of its own accord abiding continuously, joyously, and flexibly on its chosen internal object with intense clarity and firm stability. At this level of mental development, concentration does not require any exertion at all. So, this meditator who's developed fully qualified calm abiding can enter that samadhi, that incredibly deep state of concentration, just at will. And then they can really maintain it, really, they say, even if they wanted to, for weeks, weeks on end, if they chose to, without arising from their meditation, because the functions of the body slow dramatically when a person is, their breathing, their heart rate, their respiration, everything just dramatically starts to sort of shut down. Um, and so they can maintain that for really as long as they might want. So he's going to now talk about what are the cooperative conditions, and what are the internal and external conditions that we need to cultivate in order to train in calm abiding. So the first is to overcome laziness, he says. So laziness is one of the main hindrances to being able to develop this state. And the first that we come across in our own lives is just a difficulty getting started, kind of the inertia that is working against developing a stable practice. So um, and so that can be either because we just find it difficult to make time for it. So here, in this sense, laziness can take the form of busyness, which we usually think as productivity. We usually think, well, I've got, I have to do this for work, and I play this instrument, and I like to play tennis with these people on the weekends, um, and I'm constantly being invited to go out to dinner, and to see shows. And so we kind of think, oh, my life is just, it's so full of all of these different things. And we feel like we're juggling so many things. And that, if that is preventing us from having, um, from finding time to have our practice, then that is actually a form of laziness, where we're attracted to things that aren't really helpful. They might not be unethical things, they might not be destructive things, but but because they're not unethical, they're not destructive, they're able to take up a lot of our time. It isn't that we are going around harming people, but we are watching this movie and then having this dinner, and of course we need to make time to have supportive friendships and to make time for our family and so on. But there's a balance, too, of, am I um, just avoiding my practice, or what do I value? Um, do I really want to achieve enlightenment? Do I really believe that it's possible? Do I really believe that it's possible for me? And are those thoughts kind of causing me to gravitate away from my practice? Yeah. So if that's happening, then that is, from the Buddhist perspective, that's considered to be a lazy mind. Um, and of course, another, laziness can also be attraction to non-virtue as well. Um, so that can be like when we plot, when we think about, revenge, or we get lost in fantasies of attachment. So anger and attachment and jealousy, all of these afflicted states that our mind is under the influence of, um, they can not necessarily actually engaging in outwardly harmful actions, but it can take up a lot of our mental space. And then we can just get carried away and have a difficult time. And then also the view that we are not capable, the view that, because we've looked at how we all sentient beings possess Buddha nature. So, but if we think, oh, well, meditation is something that only, the great yogis are able to do, or you have to live in a monastery free from all, kind of worldly interaction in order to do it, if those are just sort of excuses, and, or we think, well, there's something wrong with me and my ability to meditate, um, then those are just, we're kind of just giving ourselves an out. We're kind of letting ourselves off the hook, and we're deciding that, well, it's just not possible for me. And His Holiness advises us to contemplate the advantages of calm abiding. And you could say the disadvantages of not achieving calm abiding. So, I mean, if we think about how incredible it would be to be able to enter that deep samadhi at will, to have these incredible realizations, um, then we'll really develop the motivation to figure out how to do it and to apply ourselves to cultivate those states. Okay, so if we get to that, if we develop the mind that wants to achieve calm abiding, then there are helpful external conditions for practice. Um, so here, it's good to have a place that is free of distraction, So I just said, that it's a mistake to think that we have to be a yogi or we have to have access to a monastery. All of that's wrong thinking, and that's true. But then, of course, they say that you can't develop calm abiding apart from retreat. That is true. We can make a certain level, we can reach a certain degree of calm abiding. As I mentioned, there are 9 stages, and we'll look at those a little bit later. But you can in daily life, if you're just meditating, once a day, twice a day for 20, 30 minutes, if you work up to that, you can expect to, over time, you can expect to get to, I don't know, the 4th or 5th stage of calm abiding. But it is presented in the material, in the historical teachings, that um, to get to the 9th level of calm abiding does require engaging in long retreat. Um, and they'll say in the historical teachings that it can be done, within several months, um, but it's that's probably unrealistic. Um, for our minds, we're so habituated to distraction, unlike 2,000 years ago. Of course, their minds were also quite distracted, but I think maybe we've gotten worse. Um, so it's hard to say how long it would take, but trying to set aside time for retreat is important. And eventually, if a person wants to develop fully qualified calm abiding, they're going to need to spend, you know, several months in retreat, maybe a year, maybe, it's going to be a, an intensive process to truly develop fully qualified calm abiding. Um, so, having a place where you can go and do retreat is a necessary condition. Um, and then they say we also need to get to a place where we've reduced our desires, where we don't think about um, food and clothing and comfort as much as we do now. We've reduced. We are satisfied with simple food, simple clothes. While we're engaging in this retreat, the mind is subdued. So the point really is that if this is something that we think we might do at some point in our lives, then we need to think about getting to the point where that's true, getting to the point where it's reasonable to think that we can do long retreat. It isn't to say, oh, well, I should just go do long retreat right now, because we'd probably go insane if we tried to do a 6 month or a 1 year retreat, by ourselves, more or less, trying to meditate, 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day. We're not prepared for that. So the question, is how do I spend? Again, we may decide that um, that sort of goal isn't. Maybe we decide that it's not realistic in this life, and that's okay. But if we have the view of doing something like that, then the thinking would be, how do I spend the next 10 years or 15 years preparing my mind for a 6 month or a 1 year retreat? And then also financially, and, so thinking about all of the things that need to come together to make that happen. Um, or we just decide, that maybe we will aspire to that. And so then we just kind of try to create the causes and conditions. And then if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. So there's different ways of thinking about it. But um, the goal is really, since we do have a worldly kind of life, how do we make progress in um, even just being able to meditate for 6 hours for one day, because a retreat is 6, 8, 10 hours of meditation every single day, 7 days a week for months on end. But how do we get to just being able to comfortably accomplish that for even a single day without the mind just kind of going berserk? So we kind of break it down into steps, and slowly, slowly over time, we want to just make progress and take that kind of progress as our goal. Um, and then if the causes and conditions come together, then, fantastic. And then, of course, His Holiness talks about the role that vows play, lay vows, and so on for constraining our actions and creating that sense of contentment, that sense of um, inner peace, inner satisfaction. So, living in vows is a way in which we can begin to train the mind, calm the mind, so that meditation comes more easily because we're not engaging in overt negativity, and so we're not worried. We're not stressed out about um, the police knocking on our door, or what did I do last night, or we have a kind of calm in the mind that comes from that ethical restraint, and that can be a really helpful support for meditation. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? All right. So then, of course, if we're going to be meditating in this retreat setting, His Holiness gives an explanation of the posture to engage in, which is a stable, upright posture, usually seated on a cushion on the floor. So, to just give a brief overview of that posture, it's ideal if you can rest each foot on each opposing thigh. That requires a high degree of flexibility. If it's possible to rest one foot on one thigh and tuck the other foot in, that's quite good too. If you just can do a simple cross-legged position, that's also fine. The only real instruction that they give for progressing from simple cross-legged to what's called that full Vajra position, where both feet are on the opposing thighs, is at the beginning of every session to, for a couple of seconds, try to move your foot kind of toward that goal, to kind of literally just hold your foot and pick it up and kind of do the best that you can to move in the direction from cross-legged to being on the middle of the thigh until it starts to be uncomfortable. Um, and then try to hold that posture for, a minute or two before you relax. And then over time, that will stretch things, and, you'll um, within maybe a few years, um, you'd be able to make progress on that. Um, of course, things like yoga and so on, those are not Buddhist traditions, but they're also very helpful in developing mind-body connection and flexibility. But from the Buddhist tradition that really just describe it like that, where you kind of increasingly approximate the ideal position just very, very briefly at the beginning of every single session. And then that will help you to move in that direction slowly over a period of time, a relatively long period of time. But it's also probably true that if you're starting later in life, it's hard to say, um, whether the full Vajra position, you know, people are different, and so you shouldn't feel like the full Vajra position is a requirement, and that if you are just stuck and cross-legged, or even if you need to use it, sit in a chair, and have your feet supported, on a cushion or something, that somehow that will prevent calm abiding from arising. That's not true. It's just that the full Vajra position is the ideal position, but it's certainly fine to stay in a lesser option. It's fine. It's not a problem. So we don't need to get discouraged if we think that particular goal will never arise in this life. It's not a serious issue. We can just, do our best to have a stable, comfortable, upright position. So then we're seated, and we're doing something. We're doing one of those three things with our legs. And then the back is really kind of the most important part of the posture. We don't want to lean forward. We don't want to lean back. We don't want to be leaning to the sides. We want to keep a nice upright posture so that, the torso is elevated and open. Um, we put the hands in the lap, right over left, with the thumbs touching, tucked in to the body. And then we just we don't squeeze the elbows to the body, and we don't, hold them wildly upright, but we just kind of make sure that there's some airflow happening, uh, you know, underneath the elbows and armpits and so on. Uh, and then we keep our head and our neck just ever so slightly tilted down. Our eyes are ideally about three-fourths of the way closed, rather than tightly closed, or even, if lightly closed feels more comfortable, that's okay. Three-fourths of the way closed is maybe ideal. So we definitely do want to make sure that the combination of our eyes, in conjunction with the amount of ambient light in the room, is certainly sufficient to maintain an alertness in the mind. So we don't want to go into a completely dark room and close our eyes and think that we're going to have a really sharp, alert, focused session of meditation. We're almost certainly going to tend toward drowsiness in that regard. Okay. And then, one of the points is to kind of touch the tip of the tongue to the roof of the mouth behind the front teeth. If you can kind of get into the habit of just placing it like that at the start of your sessions, um, then that will reduce the need to swallow saliva during the course of the meditation. Uh, And then, we breathe in and out through the nose, pretty much exclusively. We should try to breathe in and out through the nose. Any thoughts or questions so far? So next, His Holiness talks about, if we're going to train in calm abiding, we've talked about the necessity of it, kind of what it is, where to, how to set things up in a conducive way, and then how to sit. But we, of course, need to use an object, because all meditation has an object. One of the definitions of meditation is the ability to put the mind on a chosen object and have it remain there for as long as, the skill of meditation is the ability to hold the mind to a chosen object, and for as long as you might like, which again is happens when you perfect meditation in the accomplishment of fully qualified calm abiding. So we don't just space out, we choose an object that will be the object that we use to cultivate calm abiding. And His Holiness gives a very historical presentation of different objects that were taught in various sutras. Uh, he first talks about if we can identify, because we talked about one of the things that gives rise to a lot of distraction are the arising of the afflicted states. When we try to meditate, if there's a lot of attachment arising, then objects of attachment, other people, food, going to the beach, what have you, those kinds of objects will be what the mind gravitates toward, and that is what will make it difficult to make progress in meditation. If aversion is quite strong, then we'll be thinking about how we've been slighted that day or that week, or we'll be developing um, kind of an inability to deal with the discomfort that we might be in, or you know the birds chirping will start to agitate the mind, and we'll start to get frustrated at the birds. um, so those are different. When aversion is strong, then a certain range of objects arise. When attachment is strong, a different set of obstacles or objects will arise. So one way of progressing in calm abiding is to think about what of the kind of primary delusions or afflictions is the strongest for me, because some people are not, kind of angry people. They don't have a short temper. They're not combative, but maybe they have a lot of attachment. They think about food a lot. They think about, wanting to be in this relationship, or, just different kind of pleasant or attachment to comfort. They're always kind of adjusting the temperature, or trying to do things that make themselves feel better. Um, so that can be different for different people, what predominates in the mind. So identifying what for you predominates in the mind can lead you to using an object that counters that predominant affliction as your object that you're going to use to cultivate calm abiding. Um, so he talks about that the uh, if lust predominates, then you can kind of see through, you can analyze the kinds of bodies, whether they're male or female or what have you, the kinds of bodies that give rise to lust for you. And you can recognize that there's blood and pus and bones and all kinds of unpleasant things that are really there. I mean, if you think of the most beautiful person that you can imagine, and all you do is imagine that the first 2 or 3 layers of skin is removed from, there's, I think, 7 layers of skin or something. Um, and if you just think about taking the first 2 of them off of that body, now you have a horrific image, and same person, same personality, same um, abilities and traits and so on. But if you were attracted to what they looked like, now you're not. And so it's interesting to think about, just as an imaginative exercise. It's interesting to think about, or like if they were, and it's, of course, it's also true that on a deeper level, we can be attracted to people that we know very well. And one of the reasons that we're attracted to them is because of who they are in a conventional sense. We're attracted to their compassion and their kindness that they show people, and we we like who we are when we are around them. And, in a situation like that, of course, it may not be such a physical attraction. But here we're kind of just talking about um, getting carried away with superficiality. Um, but it could be that that aversion, frustration, anger, that sort of thing, that could be the most problematic emotion for someone. And His Holiness advises cultivating love, to because you can't, in the same moment, you can't look at a person and feel um, ill will toward them and want them to be happy and to have the causes of happiness, and want them to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. You can go back and forth between all of those ways of relating to them, but not in the same moment. So if we can have a lot of moments um, where we think about what makes us angry, the people, the situations that make us angry, and we can cultivate the wish for those people to be happy and to be free of suffering, then that will diminish um, that feeling of animosity, that feeling of ill will. If confusion and dullness predominate, if the mind is kind of dull and sleepy, and it's sort of the procrastinating mind, then um, he says that, I mean, he gives a pretty complex, he says, to meditate on the dependent arising of phenomena and their causes, or the 12 links of dependent origination. So, kind of um, overcoming um, ignorance with other kinds of, it's not the wisdom realizing emptiness, but it's the wisdom that understands cause and effect, or the wisdom that understands how beings are trapped in cyclic existence. If pride is the predominant, because again, he's going through kind of the historical list of the most basic afflicted states. So pride is next on the list, and that's certainly something that predominates for many people. He says the antidote to that is to meditate on all of the things that we do not know, um, to overcome our self-aggrandizement. We can think about complicated scientific topics, philosophical topics, um, biological, the just the workings of our own body we don't really understand. And certainly we don't understand quantum mechanics or astrophysics, or, if we do understand astrophysics, we probably don't understand sociology, or um, there are fields, regardless of what field we might be an expert in, there are many fields that we're not expert in. So you try to cultivate humility by recognizing, okay, well, yeah, I know some things, but um, I might be a heart surgeon, but if I'm in an airplane and the airplane's having trouble, then someone who understands how to fix an airplane is the most important thing in that moment. Someone, my skill is useful under certain circumstances, but there are countless circumstances where the skill of someone who understands something else is what is necessary to make that situation work out well. So, you know, yeah, it's not to put yourself down, but it's to recognize that your skill set is just one collection of abilities. There are many other collections of abilities, and there are many things that you're not good at. You don't know how to fix a jet engine. You don't know how to, you know, survive in the jungle. But there are people who could be dropped off in the jungle and make it out alive. And there are people who could safely land an airplane that was having engine trouble. And so there's many different ways of being skilled in things. And so you try to see the bigger picture and overcome your kind of, because we tend to just think, oh, well, the things that I am good at, those are the things that are important. I'm not good at math, so that's for other people. I can just get an accountant, and I don't need to know those things. But the fact that in order to do our taxes, we need to hire someone. That should kind of calm down that sense of self, that over uh, exaggerated view of ourselves. And then if excitation is the predominant um, afflicted state, then he advises meditating on the breath. And then so those are the, if you wanted to take that approach, which is a historically taught approach, then that's what you would do. You would try to think about overall, what do I struggle with the most? What is it that um, is the biggest source of obstacle for me in meditation? And using the antidote, the analytical antidote to that afflicted state as the vehicle for calm abiding. Alternatively, he advises using an image of the Buddha. Um, and in this text, he says, or some other religious figure, since concentration on it imbues your mind with virtuous quality. So, certainly I think if, um, for a Buddhist, the purpose of developing calm abiding is to free oneself, to achieve liberation from cyclic existence. So a person probably would, I would imagine, in that context, a person probably would choose the actual image of the Buddha. If a person was generally interested in meditation and they were using it to just develop good qualities, for a more general purpose, then of course they could adapt that, because they might resonate, they might have a different philosophical view, a different kind of goal, and they might use an image of Jesus or Muhammad. I don't know if, since you can't, I don't know about, whatever, but there's some other, or some figure, maybe, their own teacher in some way, some other religious figure that represents what they are striving for. Um, but historically, again, it is the actual Shakyamuni Buddha that Buddhists would use. So, and of course, he points out that when we do this, we are not relying on we're not observing a physical object in our meditation. We're not putting a statue or a painting in front of us and staring at it for the session of meditation, we are perhaps doing that prior to the start of the session. We have some representation, a statue, a painting, a picture of the Buddha, and we are looking at that to generate an internal representation of the Buddha, because it's meditation is always an internal activity. It's not, it doesn't rely on physical stimuli outside of oneself to accomplish. So you would spend a few minutes observing the object, but then you would, you know, three-fourths of the way close your eyes, and kind of your gaze would be downward, and you would be recollecting, using your imagination, recollecting what it was you observed, and then painting a mental picture of the Buddha and using that. And he says that when we do this, we imagine that it's not, although we used that painting or that statue, we don't imagine the internal representation as kind of like a statue floating in space, or kind of a piece of paper with a painting on it. We imagine it as if it was the living presence of the Buddha, generally radiant, made of light. Um, but we think of it as the actual embodiment of the Buddha. We try to think that our concentration is invoking the actual presence of the Buddha. He says, imagine the religious object. So again, here he's not requiring the use of the Buddha, but imagine the religious object at the same level as your eyebrows, about 5 or 6 feet in front of you. It is 1 to 4 inches in height. So sometimes they'll say about the size of the palm of your hand. He says the smaller the object, the more it will focus the mind. It should be clear and bright, emitting light but dense. So we think of it as having weight to it. So even though it's luminous and radiant, it's not like a hologram. We think of it as possessing mass. Its brilliance will help to keep the mind's mode of perception from being too loose. Its density will help keep the mind from scattering to other objects. He says, now the object is fixed with respect to its nature and size for the duration of cultivating calm abiding. You should not switch from these, even though over time the image may change in size, color, shape, position, or even number. Put your mind back on the original object. If you strive too hard to make the object bright and clear, this will interfere. Constantly adjusting its brightness will prevent stability from developing. He says moderation is needed. Once the object appears, even vaguely, stick with it. Later, when the object is steady, you can gradually adjust its brightness and clarity without losing the original image. So that's important. We don't, and here he says, for the length. So he's talking about, for the 3-month retreat, the 6-month retreat, whatever it might be, we don't want to be kind of indulging in, getting bored with, like, oh, I'll make it today, I'll make it blue, and then tomorrow I'll make it, because that's what the mind is going to want to do. The mind is going to want to feel a sense of, because there's a lot of repetition, of course, involved when you're doing the same exact thing for 8 to 12 hours a day for 6 months. even if, like I said, there's a long process of preparation that's necessary for this kind of retreat to seem reasonable for a person. But even still, you're going to be stretching yourself, and there'll be a tendency um, to want to make it more interesting and to kind of have it be technicolor and all kinds of things. And His Holiness is really saying to fight against that impulse and just decide on one image and just keep intentionally. So again, that would mean that you would use one referent object, one painting, one statue, one thangka, and that would be your referent object. And your goal would be to hold the mind to just that one representation, and not changing all of these factors. So in chapter 9 is called Tuning Your Mind for Meditation. And he starts with an explanation of laxity or dullness and excitement. These two, two of the um, major obstacles to calm abiding. Laxity is a dullness of the mind. He says there's coarse, subtle, and very subtle forms of laxity. In coarse laxity, the mind is not at all clear, and the mind feels sunken or weighted down. In subtle laxity, you remain on the object, but the mind lacks intense clarity. In very subtle laxity, the intensity is just slightly lacking, the mind being just slightly loose. Laxity occurs, he says, when the mind is withdrawn inside in the process of developing meditation. He says this is not lethargy, which is a heaviness and unserviceability of the mind and body from dullness, and which can occur even when attending to an external object. In lethargy, your body is heavy, and your mind is heavily trapped in darkness. So this is laxity. He's distinguishing between laxity and lethargy, which are related, but here he's saying that laxity is, it does, the coarse laxity, he's saying, does still have that kind of sunken or weighed down feeling, which is very much like the heaviness of dullness, but really there's a lack of clarity. The key component is a lack of clarity, and then that lack of clarity has different levels. It's either completely obscured, or it's just not intensely clear, or it is pretty intensely clear, but there's maybe a little couple notches to that clarity, that intensity that you're missing in your object. So this is what you would progress through as you moved toward fully qualified calm abiding. Of course, laxity would predominate in the beginning stages, and then um, subtle laxity would begin to predominate, and then you'd still have to yet overcome even very subtle laxity. But also excitement or agitation arises, and that is a scattering. So with a scattering of the mind. So with laxity, there's a movement kind of away from, not toward anything, but just kind of a going inward of the mind, kind of a withdrawing from the mind, uh, a withdrawing of the mind from the object, kind of internally. Whereas excitation is the mind ping-ponging to a variety of external objects. Um, he says there are coarse and subtle forms of excitement as well. In coarse excitement, you forget your meditation and you stray off into other thoughts. In subtle excitement, the object is not lost. A corner of your mind is involved in fast moving thought. Although, he says, although in subtle excitement, the object is not lost, a corner of your mind is still involved in fast moving thought, like water flowing under the frozen surface of a river. So, yeah. He says, in between sessions of meditation, it is important to restrain your senses, to eat a moderate amount of food, and to maintain conscientious introspection of body and mind. Otherwise, these can serve as causes of laxity and excitement. Sleeping too much generally leads to laxity, whereas having unrealistic expectations about the pleasures of life tends to lead to excitement. And then he advises that we uh, keep our sessions of meditation quite short, but more frequent, rather than trying to push and have really long sessions. He says when your performance improves and these problems, the problems of laxity and excitement, when these diminish, then you can begin to add time to your sessions. But if you're finding that there's a lot of laxity, there's a lot of excitement, then you need to make sure that your sessions are shorter but more frequent. And then he advises the historical advice, which may or may not work for everyone, but the historical advice is that meditating at dawn is quite helpful. Meditating, you could say early in the morning or at dawn. He says, your senses have not yet become active, but the power of thought is present. And because the sense organs are not yet working, I'm not sure what he means by not working, but I mean, you know, you've just woken up, and so there's a kind of calmness in the body. You will have fewer distractions. He says, in my own experience, dawn is when my mind is clearest and sharpest. Any thoughts or questions?
I'll just comment. I think that can be variable because I can wake up and like I've been sort of dreaming about things that worry me. So I'm not that calm straight away. I also can feel very lethargic. I find that for me, and this is, I think everything's individual. I know that. If I exercise first, that kind of changes my energy level, shifts my stress, and I'm able to I'm able to focus better. Yeah, would be my
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah, we all just kind of have to experiment, with different things and see what works best for us. And, because we might think, oh, well, meditating as soon as I get home from work might be, but that might be a miserable time. We might have to make adjustments. And so it's kind of about finding a routine that works, for each individual person. Because, yeah, it's not. Um, and it, depending on our habits with coffee and things, and just how well we sleep, because, he's also talking about really getting a lot of restful sleep, which isn't something that in the West happens very much anymore. So that's also a real problem. Um, so yeah, just kind of investigating different strategies and really just observing what works best. Let's see. And then the next section is just called mindfulness and introspection. So here he's talking about the two tools that we use, the two qualities of mind that we bring to bear in these sessions that are necessary for making progress. Mindfulness is holding the mind continuously to the object. It is the direct antidote to forgetfulness. He says, since beginners have this ability only to a minor degree, you need to train and enhance it by repeatedly putting your mind back on the object. So, this is essentially training in mindfulness, is essentially giving yourself the instruction of that the goal of your session is to hold your mind to the object rather than, because the only thing that distinguishes meditation, we can think of meditation as a specialized form of thinking, but in other forms of thinking, we might be indulgent of distraction. We might, find no problem going off on a tangent when the tangent arises. But when we're meditating, we at least at the start of the session give ourselves the instruction that I'm not going to indulge in distraction. And it's really simply the process of noticing the arising of distraction and choosing to bring the mind back to the object, and then noticing distraction again, um, moving the mind back. Um, that is the mechanism. Uh, and then he says the technique for recognizing whether laxity or excitement is preventing the mind from developing clarity and stability is called introspection. So, in order to bring the mind back to the object, you have to become aware that the mind isn't on the object, that clear, stable recognition of the object is not present in the mind and something else is present. That noticing is introspective awareness. So, introspective awareness is like, oh, yeah, okay, everything's going well. The object is there. It's very clear. It's very stable. Um, and he says it's not done with the full force of the mind, but as if from the side, so as not to interfere with the mind's focus on the object. Um, so he says, indeed, to achieve powerful mindfulness, you need to monitor whether you're staying focused on the object, but the special function of introspection at this point is to see whether the mind has come under the influence of laxity or excitement, not only whether or not it's staying on the object. Because again, you have those different layers of laxity and excitement where the mind may be on the object, but it might be dull, or there might be a subtle excitation. So we need to do both. We need to recognize, is there a totally different object in the mind? And if so, that's a problem and we bring the mind back. But also, even if the object is present in the mind, we also need to recognize, is it there but in a less than perfectly clear and stable way, or is it there but in a where there's still some busyness in the mind, and so that it's not like a real tranquil holding of the object. um, and if so, then um, apply the antidotes to laxity and excitement, so that um, yeah, so that the object is there. He says, within your own experience, you need to recognize when your mode of meditation has become too excited or too lax, and determine the best practice for adjusting it. Um, as your faculty for introspection develops, you will gain an inner sense of the right level of tautness, like tuning a guitar string until the right balance is found, neither too sharp nor too flat. Eventually, as a result of your own accumulated experience, you will be able to detect laxity and excitement just before they arise, and implement techniques that prevent their arising, tightening or loosening the mind's mode of apprehending the object. Any thoughts or questions? I think we'll leave it there for today, because the next section is going to go into the remedies. So, what to do when you notice laxity or excitement is arising. He's going to give several specific remedies that we can apply, and then he's going to give a description of the 9 levels after that, um, and talk about the features.
I do have a question.
Mhm.
Yeah, which I didn't want to do it earlier. I mean, one of the things that we're working on is, and it says here in the description, His Holiness helps readers to see the world as it actually exists. Okay. Now, this is okay. So it looks to me, and this is from other classes I'm doing, it's like we're questioning that what we look out upon, is this what's really happening? It's only up to perhaps a projection of our mind. Is that really how it works? I have an idea about myself, about who I think I really am. We're questioning, I'm questioning that. So as a result of those questions and that introspection about emptiness in its various forms, what comes up for me is feeling uneasiness and disconcerted. It's because I'm challenging everything I have had, I assumed about how the world works. Particularly physicalism has been one of them. So that's decades worth. And challenging all of that, I find myself uncomfortable, right? And I understand why. Yeah, that's fine. I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, because I had actually I asked Robina about this at one point, and she said, it's not uncommon, yeah, to have this sense that I'm going through. So what, for those of us who are living in the world and in a Western civilization, any guidance about how we address this discomfort? What's our best approach for something like that?
I mean, I don't know that I mean, it's true. It is still true that, that the world is still reliable. Um, you can still, your cup is still going to hold water. The airplane is still going to be able to get you from one place to another. So things that are empty of inherent existence, they still function. Um, so we can still depend on objects to function in the way that they do. I mean, of course, within the limitations of impermanence, and they're going to fail just because they age, and they lose their ability to perform functions. But generally speaking, um, a chair is empty of inherent existence, but you can still sit in it. It's not going to suddenly not support your weight just because it's empty, just because even when you realize its emptiness meditatively, directly, still it will perform its function. Um, so,
Yep. I would say on a practical level, right? There's not really an issue here. Yeah, everything will still work as it has
mhm,
done. What the issue is, though, maybe I'm unique in this, is my feeling of apprehension. It's a little bit like almost being in the matrix, red pill, blue pill, that kind of discomfort. It's an emotional reaction to the fact that things may not be as I always assumed they were. Right? That's what I'm talking about.
yeah. I mean, I think it's generally a good sign. As I said, they usually say that if we take it seriously, then there isn't something that we just discard. Because when something is uncomfortable, if we just push it away, then it doesn't really touch us in a deep way, and doesn't really lead to that kind of um, disconnect. But when we are taking it seriously, then it can cause that. Um, so that's it's a good sign in the sense that it's probably an indication of maybe some imprints of past practice, where it's able to go in more deeply than it would otherwise. But so in that sense, they say we should be happy, you know that that we're actually having a reaction to it, rather than just being like, oh, that's silly, or oh, that's just not true, and just throwing it away. We've actually taken it on board, and it's something that's actually impacting the mind. um, but other than just sort of persisting, because anything through repetition and through familiarity, I think anything that seemed foreign or um, uncomfortable becomes more a part of the mind and less problematic. Um, so other than just deciding, looking at the benefits of it, and recognizing that it is the only doorway into enlightenment, that because I haven't realized this, that's the only reason I suffer. That's the only reason that I grasp at my body and my mind, and that I grasp at existence. And um, so, of course, that idea of enlightenment, that is sort of a unknown, expansive thing, is sort of a nebulous, but we can recognize all of the extraordinary qualities that come with it, and we can see that there's only one method for accomplishing that, um, which is to feel the discomfort and persist um, in it for the end goal, and just trying to keep in mind the whole point is um, to not to get rid of relating to things in a constructive way, but to get rid of relating to them in an impossible way. Um, we still have a body and mind. there still is a body and mind after we realize the emptiness of the body and mind, but we just don't hold it to be as solid as we do right now, as set up from its own side. We just hold it in a softer way. Um, so,
Okay, thank you. I do have another one, which is this. Would you like to tell me how meditation has impacted on you? How has it changed your life?
I mean, I'm not a very good meditator, so I don't. Yeah, I think that I think I've certainly noticed that um, things go better. My day goes better, and it's easier to apply. It's easier to recollect the philosophical teachings. It's easier to, in situations, it's easier to have more spaciousness in the mind. Um, when, on days that I do versus days that I don't. But yeah, I'm certainly not a very good meditator. So, uh,
I've asked this questions of others and had a similar response about not being a very good meditator. So that gives me hope. Thank you. I appreciate your input very much. Thank you.
all right. So we will leave it there for today. So we'll end just with dedication. So we recollect that we established a virtuous motivation at the beginning, and that we actualized that motivation by listening and participating and contemplating the teachings, which has created positive energy in the mind, and that positive energy will ripen in beneficial ways. So we visualize strongly, really vast and profound positive effects rippling out from that positive energy, from the merit that we've created. So on your own, try to give away the fruit of your efforts and think that that energy ripens for the benefit of countless sentient beings in incredibly vast and profoundly beneficial ways. All right. Well, thanks for coming. I will
Thank you.
see you next week.